We will start with Dr. Jose. Thank you.
Okay, again, good afternoon to you all. And let's start this by looking into, first, I propose to look at two topics this afternoon. One is what the Libingan ng mga Bayani is all about, what it stands for, and who is supposed to be or who can be buried there. And then move into the war record of former President Marcos, both what he and his supporters claim he did and what we are able to find out through more objective sources. So, let me move on. So, what is the Libingan ng mga Bayani? It was formerly a state cemetery created as early as 1947. It was called the Republic Memorial Cemetery in 1947. At that point, the land was not big enough for it, but in 1954, it became the Libingan ng mga Bayani officially. The Libingan ng mga Bayani was set in Fort Bonifacio. Fort Bonifacio was previously an American military base. It was Fort McKinley. It was turned over to the Philippines in 1949. So in 1954, when it became the Libingan ng mga Bayani, that was already set up there in Fort Bonifacio. Basically, those who were buried here initially were those who died in the Capas concentration camp in Camp O'Donnell, the victims of the Death March. And many of them were nameless. They still are nameless there. If you go to Libingan ng mga Bayani, there's just huge plots there of unknown Filipinos who died during the Death March or in prison camp. Who are eligible? Essentially, those who can be buried would be former or current presidents. We had some presidents, of course, die in the service of the country. Rojas and Magsaysay, not all of them, incidentally, are buried there. But former presidents are eligible to be buried in the Libingan ng mga Bayani. Not all of them are buried there again. There are quite a number of exceptions to the rule. There are also former secretaries of national defense, ranking officials in the Philippine government, secretaries of foreign affairs, generally members of the AFP, those who died in active service or veterans of World War II are also eligible to be buried there. And then aside from this, we also have civilians who had distinguished themselves in the service of this country. Among them, national scientists, national artists. There are separate plots for these people there. The presidents, former presidents, there's a section just for former presidents, and again, former dignitaries of the government, there are sections there. So statesmen, former politicians, military personnel, distinguished artists, and so forth. Note, however, that there is a clause in the implementing rules that not eligible were those who are dishonorably discharged from the service, those convicted of an offense involving moral turpitude. So if we look at the Marcos case, some people would say that he is qualified because he was a former soldier, and therefore he was part of the AFP. He was a former president, and again, technically you would say yes, he can be buried there. But if one looks at the other circumstances, which I will show in a little while, one will see that there are so many questionable things that came up, and do we want somebody like this to be buried there? This is what the Libingan ng mga Bayani looks like. As you enter it from the front, you will first enter the main gates, and then this is the tomb of the unknown soldier. And the flag of the Philippines is always at half-mast here to denote that the country is in mourning for all of those who died in the service of the country. What is ironic is that the supposed plot for President Marcos is right behind this. It's in the central part of the Libingan, to the left side of this. So, very close to the entrance, and why this was allowed, why the grave was actually allowed to be built, that I don't know. I still have not gotten into the inside story of this. Now, what did Marcos claim was his war record? Marcos's war record, especially if one reads to the martial law literature, was that he was the most bemedaled Filipino hero in World War II. He won even more medals than the top American World War I hero and top World War II hero, as a matter of fact. And so he claimed to have more medals than all of these people. Depending on what source you look at, it ranged from either 27 medals or 33 medals. Public Information Affairs Office of the martial law era said he had 33 medals. He was supposedly, the bravest hero we had in World War II. His actions in Bataan were supposed to have saved Bataan from falling for 3 months. Something he did in January 1942 kept Bataan alive until April of 1942. Having one man do that is rather strange, especially when you consider that a defense campaign is always a team campaign. People work together. No one man can hold the defense of a particular area just for 3 months. He would have received the U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor, it said. He was in fact later on recommended for this, but the papers got lost and they were never found again. So this is one thing that he said. So not only did he have the 33 medals, but he also was eligible for a few more. He was also interned, he was imprisoned in Fort Santiago, he was tortured there, and then he became a famous guerrilla leader, creating the so-called Maharlika, or Maharlika group of guerrillas, which fought bravely against the Japanese during the war. Again, these are the claims, so I'll go into what he actually did, what we know of what he actually did. Furthermore, again, during martial law, there were others who said that he fought in the Battle of Besang Pass. The Battle of Besang Pass was a 4-month affair, March 1945, and it ended in June 1945. He supposedly fought there, and therefore was one of the victors of that very crucial battle. And then finally, those who supported Marcos during the martial law years would say that he was actually witness to the surrender of the Japanese in northern Luzon. Not only that, but General Yamashita personally surrendered to Marcos at that time. Now, why a top-level Japanese general would surrender to a major in the Philippine Army is something that is really remarkable. Again, that is what we have insofar as the records or the reports during martial law were concerned. Now, closer examination reveals many suspicious things. 11 of the supposed 33 medals were awarded in 1963, 20 years after the war. At that time, Marcos was Senate President, and one wonders why it took 20 years for those medals to be awarded. Of these 11, 10 of them were in fact awarded on the same day, December 20, 1963. Now, how the AFP could award 10 medals to one person in one day, 9 of these were actually in one general order. Now, when you are awarded a medal, there's one order that will say you are awarded this, the citation is there. Here you have 9 of them in one general order, which boggles the mind. What happened here? Why did this happen? Of the remaining medals, 8 of them are what we call campaign medals, which were awarded to anybody who served in a particular front during the war. I myself have 3 or 4 of these campaign medals, and I can probably wear them. If you fought in World War II, you get the campaign medal for World War II. If you fought in the Asia-Pacific theater, you get 1 medal for that. If you fought in the Philippine Defense Campaign, you get 1 medal for that. If you fought during the Philippine Liberation Campaign, you got 1 medal for that. If you were a guerrilla, recognized guerrilla during the war, you got 1 medal for that also. So how many is that already? We have 5 or 6 right away. And these are not medals awarded for courage or bravery. These are simply medals awarded because you were there at that particular time. Now, some awards, again, this makes it even more suspicious. Looking at some of the awards, some of them were awarded for the same action. So in one particular battle, you are awarded 2 medals for fighting the same thing. So that makes it extremely suspicious. Only 2 medals, it seems, were awarded during the war, 1945, 1946. And of these, suspiciously again, the citations cannot be found. There is no specific citation for those. And that again is what we find out if we look more closely. Now, if we look even more closely at Marcos's war record, what can we actually confirm and what can we actually point out through third-party sources, through more official, objective sources at that time? Because if we look at the Marcos record, basing it on martial law documents, 1970 stuff, or even 1960 stuff, we would find that, of course, these are biased, these are politically motivated, and so forth. So what do we actually know? We know that he was a reserve officer training corps graduate. He was in UP. He was called to the colors as a reserve officer. He served in Bataan. He was with the 21st Division. He was assistant intelligence officer there. And he went behind Japanese lines to spy on Japanese operations in the back. And then he came back and reported to the headquarters there. He did serve in that. I have many friends who saw him in Bataan and realized that these were dangerous things. But what we'll see later on is that some of these exploits were overblown and they were exaggerated to the point of incredulity. He got sick in Bataan. After the initial fighting in 1942, in January 1942, the lines pulled back, and after that he got sick with malaria, and he was in the hospital for most of the duration. So therefore there's no more heroism there because he was a sick guy. And when Bataan surrendered, he participated in the Death March. He walked in the Death March. In that particular point in time, he said he tried to escape 3 times. But he always returned back. Either he was too sick, we don't know exactly why. One of the stories told during martial law was that one time he escaped, he looked back, and he saw that 10 men from his group were gathered together and were slated to be executed. So they were going to be beheaded. Now, why would you, if you're trying to escape something like this, turn back to see what was going on to the rest of your group? You would have run as far as you can. So watching it happen, he came back to save the lives of these 10 men, supposedly. The thing is, the Japanese didn't operate that way. You have a group of 100 people marching together, and if 1 or 2 managed to get out, they would punish the others, but they would not stop the whole column and behead them right then and there. So one looks into what really happened, and one finds more questions there. But he did march the Death March. He did get to Camp O'Donnell. He was a prisoner of war until about August of 1942. Again, the stories seem to become confusing here. One story says that his mother intervened to get him released from Camp O'Donnell so that he was released in August of 1942. The thing was, August 1942 was when prisoners were being released en masse. And one didn't have to have any intervention at this particular point in time because they were already being released by the Japanese before they would die in camp. After his release, he stayed in Manila to recuperate. There are stories that he was seen in Philippine General Hospital, he was lying around, he was very sick. Reportedly during this time, he organized a guerrilla group, which he called ang mga Maharlika. Closer examination of the members of this guerrilla group would show that many of the leaders, many of the officers, were actually his relatives, cousins, a brother joined in, and so on and so forth. It was kind of a family affair. What they actually did during the war, the only way you can confirm this is to look at other guerrilla records and see what they pointed out too. And some of them said, we heard this guerrilla organization is being formed, but they don't want to interact with any of us. And the others by that time had already become more involved. What makes things a little more fantastic is that Marcos's group would claim to go to the Visayas to try to help unify the guerrillas in 1943. Now, the Visayas had organized guerrilla forces at that time, and Marcos would try to reach out to them. Not only Visayas, but he would try to go down all the way to Mindanao. And the problem was, why would he try to go that far when the guerrilla organizations in Luzon were fairly well organized already? He didn't have to go that far. There were groups around. There were people as young as he was. There were his classmates were around the area. They were in Rizal, they were in Pampanga, they were in Laguna, and he did not join any of these. Instead, it seems he organized a group that was maybe 20, 30 people. And then after the war, this bloated up to become 1,000 people. And we find when he filed his official claims, it had ballooned up to 8,300 people. That was totally preposterous. So one looks also at records relating to Bataan. Yes, his name does come out in some of the reports. His name comes out in the 21st Division histories, but they don't say he was that much, he was outstanding. His name is usually mentioned with 2 or 3 others who were also fighting at the time. So his was not #1 hero at the time. He's not mentioned in any of the official histories of the United States. Doesn't come out in the official unit histories as well. The unit he belonged to in 1945, the 14th Infantry Regiment, was nowhere near Besang Pass. And he could not have fought in Besang Pass because the 14th Infantry was assigned to Ilocos Norte. And Ilocos Norte is very far from Besang Pass, which is in Ilocos Sur. In fact, as we'll show later, I'll show you some other documents. Other things seem to be happening more than fighting or wanting to fight. There are stories that, in fact, he was more involved in trying to sell things to collaborators, making money out of this. They have to be checked, but there are rather strange stories about all this. One story that I have heard recently, and I haven't confirmed it yet, was that he didn't want to go to Northern Luzon, but he was, of course, from Ilocos Norte. He didn't want to go there because there were two things on his record. One was the Nalundasan affair just before the war, when a rival of his father was assassinated while brushing teeth. He was charged with that, but he defended himself and supposedly cleared himself from that. That was one reason. There was some anger against him still at that time. Second point of conflict was that his own father was accused of collaboration, and I have found a Japanese diary saying, yes, he was working with the Japanese as early as 1942, and that his father was executed by the guerrillas in a very, very painful manner. So perhaps Marcos knew this, so he did not go back to Northern Luzon until very much later in the war. When he finally did go there, he joined up with the regular guerrillas there. But since he was still sick, he was in the hospital for some time and was not assigned combat duty. Now let's look at some of the medals that he's supposed to have won. Yeah. Okay, this is just this just adds to what I mentioned. No? He stayed in Manila to recuperate. He supposedly organized this guerrilla organization, tried to sail to the Visayas and Mindanao, although he did not have to do that because there were units very close to where he was. Eventually went to North Luzon and joined the guerrillas in the north, and then became an officer of the 14th Infantry Regiment in Northern Luzon. After the war, he filed claims for recognition with the U.S. Army, and they denied his claims. They asked for more documentation. He provided more documentation and was denied again. He was denied at least 6 times, and again he tried to present more documentation, and as one looks closer at the documentation, it becomes harder and harder to believe because closer examination of these documents show that they don't make sense. They were fallacies, they were imaginative stories, they were actually taking stories from other guerrilla groups and getting the claim for this. Now let's look at some of the medals that he had. The top medal that we have in the Philippines is something called the Medal for Valor. This is where he was supposedly awarded the medal because of a key incident in Bataan where he was sent to the front to lead a platoon to reinforce a gap that had been left by soldiers retreating. And it's that supposedly saved Bataan for 3 months. Things who in 1942 would know that that act would have saved Bataan for 3 months? Nobody knew that Bataan would fall in April. And so that's where the strange points come in. It was awarded in October 1958. So again, very, very late afterwards. Marcos was senator already at this time, and things were brewing, looking up for him. It, however, passed the legitimate processes, and so one thing that we should look into is not just what happened here, but how it was awarded, why it was awarded, in fact, and perhaps it's time to review the whole process. He's supposed to have won 3 Distinguished Conduct Stars. This is the second highest medal that we have. 3 medals of this, 2 for the Bataan operation and 1 as a guerrilla, including this being imprisoned in Fort Santiago. However, he never was imprisoned in Fort Santiago. I knew enough survivors from Fort Santiago who told me that he never was there. And they put up a memorial with the names of people who were incarcerated in Fort Santiago. And the survivor said we should take that down because somehow Marcos's name appeared on it. And he was never, ever in Fort Santiago. So that was one lie that comes out, and it comes out in one of these medals there. But the actions, again, when one looks more closely at this, one finds out that there are inconsistencies with the official record. And what's coming out now is that we can actually check Japanese records and confirm whether these battles actually took place. In fact, the Japanese kept clear records on how many soldiers got killed in encounters. We even have their names. And one of these distinguished conduct stars claims that Marcos, going behind Japanese lines as an intelligence officer, looked for Japanese artillery positions, found the battery, and then with a team of 10 men, destroyed the battery just by guns and grenades. Now, as an intelligence officer, you are not supposed to engage the enemy. You're supposed to determine where they are and come back, bring that information, and let the others take care of that. So that was something he shouldn't have done. He risked the whole operation by engaging the enemy then. So these are some issues that we have to get involved in. Another set of medals, the Distinguished Service Star. These are third highest medal that we have, and they were awarded for guerrilla service. And yet when one looks at the guerrilla operations of Marcos, one finds out that he hardly had any active operations against the Japanese. 2 of these were awarded on the same day. Remember, 10 of them were awarded on December 20, 1963. These were 2 of them. Guerrilla operations, the closer one gets into guerrilla operations, he did not get involved at that particular point. Okay, further. He won 4, he was awarded 4 gold crosses. The first one in 1947, which was a generic type of thing, awarded for service to the country and so forth. The more specifics come out again in 1963, and those specifics are very hard to understand or believe. It was a guerrilla ambush that he was involved in, but he was not there again. Now, things that could have saved the day were 2 American medals that were supposedly awarded before the war ended. The Marcos family has 2 U.S. medals. One is the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest American medal, next only to the Congressional Medal of Honor. And the other is the Silver Star, both of which are awarded for gallantry, courageous operations above and beyond the call of duty, and so forth. The problem with these 2, that's why there's no other data here, is the citations are lost. The citations don't exist. So after the war, it's said that Marcos tried to get copies of the citations. They were not. And one thing about the Distinguished Service Cross was it was such an important medal in the U.S. that these are fully documented. And even before Corregidor fell, every single person recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross the citation was radioed to Washington, D.C., and those records are there. So up until May 6, everybody considered for this award, there should be papers in Washington, D.C. In this case, there's nothing relating to this. So how he got them, we don't know. Now the rest of the medals, as we pointed out, campaign medals, U.S.-American Defense, World War II, Asiatic Pacific, the Philippines, Philippine Defense, Philippine Liberation, Philippine Independence, but everybody got that. That's not for gallantry, that's not for courage, and so on. Wounded soldier medals, as long as you're wounded in the course of duty, you get a Purple Heart or this Wounded Soldier Medal. You don't even have to be in active combat. If you're hit by a stone and you're in the rear and that's caused by a Japanese bomb, you get a Wounded Medal for that because you got wounded by a Japanese action. There's nothing too special about that. The others were more or less standard medals. So, okay, I'm not sure how much time I have left, but let me go into a couple of other documents to show that aside from all of this, there was very detailed investigation into Marcos's claims in 1946 to 1948. So this next one is a document. It's not very clear. I took this when I was in Washington, D.C. the last time. This is a request, a reply to a request by Marcos to go to Manila on May 6, 1945. On May 6, the Battle of Besang Pass was still being fought. The Battle of Besang Pass would not end until June 14. And here is Marcos asking to be sent to Manila to meet up with friends in an unknown guerrilla organization. For what purpose, we do not know. And so why wasn't he fighting? Wasn't he in Besang Pass? Wasn't he supposed to be fighting in Northern Luzon? He's asking for permission to go to Manila. Of course, the American response was denied. We don't see what use this is going to be for any of the organizations here. And so he was not allowed to go to Manila. What was his position at this point? He was no longer a combat officer. He was in civil affairs and the Adjutant General's office. The Adjutant General is in charge of rosters, lists of names. It's an office job in the rear lines. So that makes one wonder what he was doing. And then, let's go on to the last slide. All right, this is one of the concluding paragraphs of the American response to his claim to recognition. I will read it just to show you how serious the conditions were already at that time. It is evident that Ferdinand Marcos and S.M. Valdez combined forces in order to gain recognition, and by doing so have created a confused picture of the unit. It is also known that Marcos has enough political pressure to bring pressure where it is needed for his own personal benefit. This is 1946. And we will see this again coming in 1947 and 1948 when the Americans say, this is our final stand, we will not review it anymore, this is it. And then the second paragraph, all the available evidence on this case indicates that the decision of this headquarters, not favorably considering the unit, should be sustained. The only possible exception might be on the decision rendered on 16 men pending receipt of their attached papers, etc. So that is what the story was all about. And when one goes closer into these stories, one finds more discrepancies, one finds more confusion, one finds more inaccuracies, and the whole thing gets full of holes. When I was interviewing some veterans in the late 1970s and the early 80s, they were telling me that Marcos was never in the fighting front as a guerrilla. He did not have a guerrilla organization and so forth. But since censorship was very prevalent at that time, they told me, don't ever mention me by name. Do not publish this while I'm still alive because it might lead to very bad consequences for both of us. I never did publish any of the stories that they did tell me. They told it to me in confidence, but I still have them on tape, I recorded them, and perhaps now is one of the times that I review these and bring them out so that the others will benefit from that exchange of information. So thank you very much for listening and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jose. And I hope our students are taking down notes because it's very important to pay attention to historical records and documents to support certain claims. Now,